What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about an X-Men book that I recently finished reading, New X-Men, Childhood's End, Volume 1. This collects New X-Men issue 20 through 23. It is written by Craig Kyle, Chris Yost, and Mark Brooks is the artist. And this picks up right after the events of House of M, where 98% of the mutant population is depowered. And where most of the other X-Men books, you didn't really feel the effects of House of M very strongly. You might have one character out of a team of 6 or 7 who is depowered. Here, most of the students at the Xavier Mansion are depowered. You had like 300 something students, and well over half of them all lost their powers. So this is probably the one X-Men book out of all of them where the effects of House of M were felt the most. And this run overall is a run that a lot of people really loved. They loved it a lot more than the DePhillips and Weir run using these characters that came immediately before this run started. And I am not one of those people. I have never liked this run. This is now the third time that I've given this run a chance. The first time was when it was coming out in single issues, and I lasted about a year into this run. I gave it about 12 issues, and then I realized that it just wasn't doing it for me. I just wasn't liking it, and so I dropped the title. And then a few years ago, I was able to track down all the trades because I was in one of those points in my life where I thought, even if it's X-Men stories that I really don't like, I want to try and track down all these X-Men trades because I'm a huge X-Men fan. And also, I thought, well, maybe I didn't give the run a fair chance. And then I tracked down all the trades from the Kyle and Yost run, and I read them, and I still didn't really care for them. And now, this is the third time that I'm reading through this story anyway, and it still isn't doing it for me. And there's a few different reasons for that. Number one, a lot of people, like I said, really did not like the DePhillips Weir run. They said that not enough stuff happened, and I would counter that by saying that stuff actually did happen. You actually got to see them do things, but the series focused on characterization, which is very important when you're creating brand new characters. And I guess you could say that after about 20 or so issues, actually a little more than that, because there was 19 issues of this run, and then there was also, I think, 13 issues of the New Mutant series that came before. So for a good long while, those guys were able to build these characters. And so I guess you could say it was finally time for the characterization to stop and for stories to actually start happening. Although I would still say that there were stories that happened in the DePhillips Weir run, it just wasn't as superhero-y, action-packed as people would like, which it makes sense that when you have teenage students at a school that the adult X-Men are not going to let them go out and patrol the streets and fight crime and risk their lives because they are teenagers and they're under the care of the adult care providers. So it would make sense that these guys would not be going out into the field and doing superhero adventures like the adult X-Men would. But apparently people who really hated the Weir DePhillips run just really didn't understand that. And so that's one thing that they liked about this run, where the stakes are risen. Things are starting to happen now, and things have gotten dark for these characters. So people really like that about this run. I did not like this run for a couple reasons. Number one, I felt like it shifts the emphasis to the Hellions, who were always the antagonists of this run, this series. And I didn't really understand the appeal of the Hellions. Now, they did have their own miniseries, and I enjoyed getting a look into the characters of the Hellions, but they were still the antagonists. They were never meant to be the full-on main characters of this title. And I have often made the comparison to the Harry Potter books. I said, imagine, if you will, you read the first 2 Harry Potter books, and they are what J.K. Rowling wrote. And then in the 3rd Harry Potter book, Harry and Ron are killed off, or they're expelled from the school, or whatever. And then the rest of the series, Hermione is put into the Slytherin house, and then she, Malfoy, and some of his friends go off and have adventures. Imagine if that is what happened in the Harry Potter books. You would hate it. It would be stupid because you spent 2 books getting to know these characters who are then shunted off, and who knows what happens to them, and then suddenly the focus is shifted to the bad guys. That's exactly what happens here, where we spent a lot of time getting to know these characters who were part of the New Mutant Squad, and then it's like Kyle and Yost said, I don't care about any of those characters. We're going to move it over to these other guys who are the bad guys of the book. Now, they weren't actual bad guys. They were just students who didn't like the New Mutants, but it still doesn't make any sense that the book shifted its focus to these characters. And I just find it really difficult to read about the Hellion characters, especially Hellion himself, the leader of the Hellion Squad. I can't stand that character in this book. He is even more of a jerk face here than he ever was before or after this run. Before, he had some arrogance, and occasionally he would let his words get ahead of him, and he would say something that he didn't mean to say. But you could tell that deep, deep, deep down, he did have a heart of gold, and he wasn't 100% 100% a mean person. Here, he says and does some things that are just really jerkish, and you have to be wondering, is this even the same character that was being set up by Weir and DePhillips? And I find myself asking that a lot here. There are a lot of characters here who are handled very differently than they were in the Weir DePhillips run. Jay Guthrie is another one who just feels very different here than he did in that run. Now, when he was first introduced in Chuck Austin's Uncanny X-Men run, he definitely had some emotional angst about him, and then he started to have that. You could kind of see that at the very beginning of when he was brought into the new X-Men series. But over the course of that run, I felt like he kind of lost a little bit of that, and he kind of became more the poetic artist type. He still had a little bit of that emotional angst going on, but it wasn't quite as severe. And then, when these guys come along, it's like they forgot all of that character development, and they wrote him as being very tragic, and his soul was just twisted up into a dark shape because he lost his girlfriend a year ago. And I'm not trying to make light of that, but it's like these guys didn't even read the previous 20 issues of character development for Jay Guthrie. It's really weird that these guys, it's like they had a vision for an X-Men book, and then they were assigned the New Mutants X-Men team, and then it's like, okay, this vision does not fit this comic book, so we're going to really change everything about this comic book so that it fits our vision. That's really what it feels like. It feels like these guys had some ideas, some of which were cool ideas, some of which I don't care for, and then they wanted to change everything about this series so that it would fit their ideas instead of changing their ideas to fit this series. I still don't like this run. And another thing that I really don't understand or like is that when you're trying to talk about just one trade paperback, this is only 4 issues long, but this storyline is actually a lot longer. The storyline itself, it's like 12 issues long or something like that. Like, it's a really long story, and this is one of those things where I feel like if you were just reading it as one giant 12-issue story, you might enjoy it more than if you're reading it issue to issue, month to month, or if you're reading it one trade paperback at a time. If they had put out one giant 12-issue omnibus of the first half of the Craig Kyle, Chris Yost New X-Men stuff, then I probably would enjoy it more because I would feel like I was looking at an entire story. As is, just these 4 issues, it is a lot of setup. These entire 4 issues is all devoted to basically setting up the brand new X-Men team, where they get rid of like 80% of the New Mutants, and then most of the Hellions are brought in as main characters of this new team. This 4 issues, very little actually happens. So that's doubly why it's so puzzling to me that people really love this run, but then they really hate the DePhillips Weir run, because they claim that nothing ever really happened in the Weir DePhillips run, but then nothing ever really happens here, except that the team is put together over the span of 4 issues. And we get to see the bad guy. I haven't even talked about the bad guy. The bad guy is Reverend Stryker, and I feel like the reason that they used him is because somewhat recently, about 4 years before this run started, I guess, you had Stryker as the bad guy of X-Men 2. And then actually, about a year or so after this run started, you had him as the bad guy in Wolverine Origins. And I feel like that's the only reason that they used him as a bad guy here. Because Chris Claremont had used Stryker in his Extreme X-Men run. It was actually right around the time when X-Men 2 came out, and Chris Claremont actually had the character reform. He basically gave himself as a sacrifice to save the lives of other people. He kind of sacrificed himself in a heroic way, and he had kind of realized the error of his ways. He realized that his bigotry against mutants was irrational. And so, while that character arc might not have made a whole lot of sense, given the character that existed in the 1980s, he did go through a reformation. He did change his ways. So here, of course, Craig Kyle and Chris Yost decide to pee all over that and say, no, we're not going to have him be reformed. We're still going to have him be a bad guy. In fact, we're just going to pretend like that reformation didn't even happen. And if you've read God Loves Man Kills 2, which was the storyline that Chris Claremont did in Extreme X-Men, if you've read that and then you read this, you're going to be very confused, because you've definitely read that story more than these guys. They don't even act like that story happened at all. And I will go ahead and say, it's all set up, because there's a really cool reveal here about what's going on with Stryker, but you don't get it in this book. You're going to get it like 1 or 2 books later. And I really do wish that they had collected this entire story in one trade, instead of saying we're just going to collect a third of this story in a trade by itself, because as is, this book does not read very well at all. If you've heard good things about the Craig Kyle, Chris Yost run on New X-Men. If you've heard good things, I would highly recommend that you start with like Volume 4. That's the one where magic gets brought in and they go to Limbo. I think that story is a lot better than this one, and it's an actual story by itself. You can read that story, and it's a complete story. And then, if you like what you read there, then I would suggest that you go back and get the previous 3 volumes. Get this volume and the next 2 volumes, and then you really need to read all 3 of these volumes together. Now, I'm not going to review all these 3 volumes together. I'm still going to review them as trades, and that means that I'm probably going to be saying a lot of the same things next week and the week after that I said here, where it's not a complete story and it's just segments of story being released as if it's a complete story. But overall, I gotta say, I don't have anything positive to say about their run right now. I really don't like the direction that they went in. It just feels like they were completely slapping the previous run in the face, saying, okay, we don't like anything that Weir and DePhillips did, so we're just going to change everything. We're going to crap all over it, and they did. And I really don't like the way that they're handling Emma Frost. She's borderline psychotic here, and any time in the future when anyone says, oh, the human beings, they killed all the depowered mutants and it's all Cyclops' fault because it happened under Cyclops' watch, or they'll try to say, oh, it's all Wolverine's fault because it happened at the school and that's why we can't go back to having a school. No, it's all Emma Frost's fault because she's the one who kicked all of the depowered students off the school grounds, and they got blown up as they were leaving the school grounds. So anyone who ever tries to say that that's Cyclops' fault or Wolverine's fault, no, it's neither one of their faults. It's this psychotic, crazy supervillain, the White Queen, who is for some idiot reason trying to kick all these people out of the school because she thinks that it's unsafe at the Xavier Institute, which is one of the safest buildings on the entire planet Earth, and she thinks that it's unsafe for them. Whatever. Basically, this entire story is just garbage. It does get better later on in this run, but I really do feel like these two guys really should have done a better job of starting their run off. They should have done something else to kind of kick things off, been a little bit more inviting for people who are already reading the book. And if you've never read X-Men before and then you read this book, actually, if you've never read X-Men before, if you don't know anything about the Weir DePhillips run or Reverend William Stryker reforming in Extreme X-Men, if you've never read any of that, then you might enjoy this. But I feel like people who were reading X-Men around this time, I don't understand why they would like this, but a lot of people did. But personally, I'm going to say that you really wouldn't enjoy this. I don't see anything worth reading in this volume, but things do get better later on in this run. So as of right now, I'm going to say do not pick this up unless you have the other 2 trades. And then I would say you really just need to read all 3 trades like in one day. If you've got an entire day to kill, read all 3 of those trades as if it's one big 12-issue volume and just read it all as one story, because the first 3 trades really are one giant story. You really can't read just this trade by itself. You really can't do that. So those are my thoughts on Childhood's End Volume 1. I hope that you guys liked this video. I hope that I wasn't too rambly. And I will see you guys next week with another X-Men video, the 2nd volume of this run. And I will see you guys later on this week with some more videos. So in the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.